Puerto Rico reacts to the arrival of Hurricane Dorian. Argentinians protest against austerity while the government seeks to renegotiate its IMF loan deal. And UK residents rally in rejection of the Prime Minister's Machiavellian Brexit ploy. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South. I am Doris Polo. Tropical storm Dorian has been upgraded to a Category 1 hurricane as it hits Puerto Rico. The Miami-based National Hurricane Center reported that Dorian is still on a trajectory to strike the Atlantic coast of Florida by the weekend. A state of emergency was declared in Puerto Rico, and schools have been closed for August 29th. 2 years ago, Hurricane Maria devastated the island, leaving close to 3,000 dead.
Obviously, our recommendation is for you to listen carefully to instructions, calmly, activate your emergency plan. Puerto Rico has been through worse situations. I trust in the people of Puerto Rico. We are ready, we are going forward, and we are going to wait and see how this emergency unfolds. And we are going to be better prepared. We are much better prepared, Puerto Ricans, to cater to the needs you may have during this event.
Staying with the Hurricane, Dorian is also affecting the British Virgin Islands, where a storm warning remains in effect. Rain has already started affecting the islands, and in a couple hours, the center of the hurricane will pass about 60 miles south of the territory. 3 airports, the August George International, Teddy Bay, and the Terence B. Lettsome, have all been closed, and so have all government offices. The government has asked everyone to stay off the streets. Meanwhile, the U.S. Virgin Islands are also bracing for Dorian's effects, as the weather system is expected to drift near St. Croix. Moving on to the Amazon, Bolivia's president has decreed an ecological pause in the areas affected by wildfires that have devastated over 700,000 hectares in the Bolivian rainforest. This means that all land sales in the region are prohibited for the time being to prevent anyone from taking advantage of the tragedy.
Official reports have revealed a drastic decrease in hotspots and wildfires in Bolivia's eastern region known as the Chiquitanía. Out of 8,000 fires, the number has come down to just over 1,000.
We saw an increase of hot spots on Sunday, but thanks to thousands of firefighters we have deployed, on top of 200 vehicles and 12 firefighting aircrafts, we have greatly reduced the amount of hot spots.
President Evo Morales visited the affected regions, and after flying over them, he has confirmed there are fewer fires burning. Nonetheless, he also expressed great concern for the damage caused.
So far, I have not seen any more fires, but it's painful to see so many things burnt, so much charred land. We stopped our fires from spreading to Paraguay and Brazil. We then moved to Concepcion, where some fires are still burning. But thankfully, communities have not been affected. I asked from authorities to take care of the land and to stop any more fires from appearing.
The Bolivian government has also announced that 3 more firefighting helicopters will join the other 7 aircraft currently battling blazes. A list that includes a 747 supertanker that can carry 75,000 liters of water. The president also decreed an ecological pause in the affected areas.
This decree will prevent any sale of land, any new settlements, and will also promote post-fire efforts. This will be a temporary decree that I feel will help greatly.
Official reports have shown that 700 hectares were affected just in the Santa Cruz department, but despite the size of these fires, no lives have been lost.
And despite significant advances made by other countries, wildfires in Brazil are still devastating the Amazon region. Many social organizations are accusing Brazil's far-right president Jair Bolsonaro of deliberately dragging his feet in taking decisive action. Meanwhile, Congress is moving to approve a project that would cut protected indigenous land by half. Our correspondent Brian Meir is in the city of Puerto Velho in the Brazilian Amazon with the latest.
Now, it's begun to rain a little bit in Porto Velho, here in the heart of the Amazon region, and it looks like many of the fires have gone out. As you can see behind me, it's not as smoky as it was yesterday, for example. You can actually see the sky here for the first time since I arrived on Sunday. So as the fires begin to go out, temporarily, of course. A lot of journalists are packing up and going home and acting like this is the end of the problem, but the fires are just a symptom of a much greater problem at stake right now. Last night, in Congress, the Congressional Justice Committee gave the green light to a new project submitted by Bolsonaro's allies for a constitutional amendment which will cut the amount of protected Amazon rainforest inside of indigenous reservations by 50%. 50% of the indigenous reservations, if this bill is passed, if this amendment is passed, will be open for loggers, cattle ranchers, soy farmers, and miners. Now the problem is that 23% of the remaining virgin Amazon rainforest is located in indigenous reserves. They're huge. And so this essentially would mean, if it was ratified, that 11.5% of the standing Amazon jungle would be destroyed quickly. Now, scientists say if 20% of the remaining Amazon is destroyed, it won't be able to generate its own climate anymore. It will naturally dry out. It will reach this kind of tipping point, which they call dieback, and it will just burn to the ground on its own. And this would be disastrous for the world.
That was Ramir with that report. Still to come, the Mexican president condemns a deadly attack in Veracruz. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. Social movements are marching under the slogan "Urgent Need to Combat Hunger" in Argentina. Demonstrators are condemning the austerity policies of the current President Mauricio Macri, whose government is seeking to renegotiate its loan deal with the International Monetary Fund, or IMF. They are calling for state support for social food programs and basic welfare, which have seen massive cuts over the past 4 years of his neoliberal administration. Our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Edgardo Esteban, has the details.
Across the country, social movements are protesting, with the epicenter here in the capital, facing the Ministry of Social Development. The protesters are demanding that the government of Mauricio Macri take immediate measures, including an emergency food law, to provide a remedy to the current situation. They're also demanding answers for the most vulnerable in society, who are enduring a difficult situation as the economic crisis here deepens, especially following the open and obligatory PASO primary election last August 11th. The economy has become impossible for Macri's government to manage, and it's affecting the most vulnerable most of all. The demonstrators are hoping to visibilize the crisis by protesting at the Social Development Ministry. It's important to remember that 1 in every 2 children in Argentina lives below the poverty line, and often the situation appears hopeless.
That was Edgardo Esteban with that report. Moving to neighboring Uruguay, general elections are set for October 27th. The choice between continuing with the current government's plan or going for change is in citizens' hands.
There's less than 2 months to go before elections are held in Uruguay. After 3 presidential terms under the left-wing Frente Amplio party, voters are now debating whether to support the progressive government's plan or to back a neoliberal change. For the ruling party's candidate, Daniel Martinez, if the right wing were to win, all progress made until this point would be compromised.
The question is, are we willing to lose the rights we've gained? Do we want to lose marriage equality? Do we want domestic workers to lose their labour rights? Do we want rural workers to no longer be paid extra hours? Do we want women to once again have clandestine abortions? No, what we want is to continue working for a nation that protects the rights of everyone.
Meanwhile, opposition candidate Luis Lacalle Pou, who is representing the National Party, says the progressive model has run its course and a new president needs to step up.
I think Uruguay needs to alternate between ruling parties. I think this is healthy for democracy. I am convinced that the Frente Amplio's political project has not only run out of steam, but has completely failed.
The ruling party wants to continue down the economic road started 15 years ago, which has proven successful in many different ways. On the other hand, the opposition wants to liberalize the economy, reducing fiscal deficit and controlling public spending. It's a formula that has historically increased poverty.
Without a doubt, we are seeing two opposing models face off. Before the Frente Amplio rose to power, Uruguay had highs and lows. In the best moments, we saw the GDP grow, but also widespread income inequality and high unemployment. But during the rule of the Frente Amplio, the GDP also grew, but unemployment and income rose as well.
The general elections will take place on October 27th, the same day as in Argentina. If no presidential candidate gains a clear majority of votes, a runoff will be held on the last Sunday of November between the two leading candidates.
In other news now, at least 23 people have been killed and 13 were left badly injured in a fire at a bar in Mexico's southern state of Veracruz. According to the prosecutor's office, the fire is believed to have been started with petrol bombs thrown by unknown assailants. At least 8 women and 15 men died, with another 13 people currently being treated for serious injuries. Meanwhile, Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has condemned the violent attack in Veracruz.
It's shameful that organized crime acts like this. To act this way is the most heartless thing there is. But we also need to condemn the fact that there are authorities that are complicit.
And we move on to Colombia, where hundreds of teachers have marched on the Ministry of Education, demanding that the needs of the public education sector in the country are met. The Colombian Education Workers Federation has called a 48-hour strike until its demands are met. They are calling for the government to respect the right to public education, health and life. In 2018, 8 teachers were murdered in the province of Cauca. This year, at least 1 educator has been assassinated and 60 have been threatened because of the role they play as social leaders. Our correspondent in Colombia, Jose Manuel Jimenez, has the latest.
The teachers' demonstration continues nationwide, mainly focused here in Bogotá. This 48-hour strike was called because of the non-compliance from the government regarding the agreements reached in previous negotiations. They are also demanding reform of the National Social Benefit Fund to guarantee the pensions of more than 320,000 teachers, as well as access to healthcare. The protesters also highlighted the murder of teachers nationwide. According to reports from teachers' organizations, 10 teachers have been murdered in the country last year alone, and overall, more than 1,547 teachers have been murdered in Colombia.
Staying in Colombia, the country's National Peace Council is promoting a non-aggression pact among political parties in an effort to counter the murders of community and social leaders.
After the signing of a national truce between political parties, efforts are now being made to reach regional non-aggression agreements for the upcoming local elections, so that citizens can decide based on ideas and not on slander.
Politics should be about respectful and plural debate. It should be an opportunity to put forward proposals and plans which reflect a mature society. As citizens, we should engage in a rational debate, not by means of violence.
But while the political parties signed this non-aggression agreement, persecution continues in many parts of the country, especially against candidates who are running for public office.
Threats, persecution, discrimination by the media, and abuse. They say, what are the victims doing here? Why would anyone vote for them if we can give them this and give them that? So it isn't easy. We keep getting persecuted both by other politicians and by those involved in the conflict.
The victims of the conflict grew tired of waiting for the government and politicians to fulfill the peace agreement, in which they should have been at the center of government's policies.
This doesn't mean I will leave behind my work and my cause of defending the victims of the armed conflict. But we realize, a little late, that the only way to ensure that public policies are implemented is by taking part in politics. Unfortunately, the government didn't guarantee seats in Congress for the victims, so that has forced us to vote, not for political parties, but for the candidates of the victims of the armed conflict.
On top of the threats, persecution and murders, they also have to engage in an unequal economic battle with the traditional political machinery.
We're campaigning with very little money, so we depend on our ideas. We work hard for the rights of the communities and the victims, but it's a very unequal fight.
According to the recent report by the Electoral Observer Mission, between October 2018 and July 2019, 63 social leaders were murdered in acts of political violence.
Coming up after the break, the Zimbabwean Justice Minister calls for the EU to end its blockade on the country. Don't touch that remote. Welcome back. It's official. The Queen has approved the British Prime Minister's request to suspend the Parliament. As a result, the Parliament will now be prorogued in the week beginning September 9th until October 14th. What this means is that MPs would unlikely have enough time to pass any laws that could stop the Prime Minister taking the UK out of the European Union without a deal on October 31st. Political opponents say the controversial move is Johnson's latest power play to strong-arm Brexit, and his request could face legal challenges. And there's also a chance of a vote of no confidence that could bring down the government.
It is not too.
The opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn called the Prime Minister's move a smash and grab on democracy.
This is shutting down Parliament early to prevent a debate. Boris Johnson knows that perfectly well. What he's doing is suspending Parliament after a few days sitting, break for the conference, and then dissolve Parliament altogether and come back with a Queen's speech sometime in October. He is trying to prevent Parliament holding him to account. We will do absolutely everything we can next Tuesday to legislate to prevent him doing that and oppose this government for what it's doing.
People took to the streets across the United Kingdom to vent their frustration with the Prime Minister's move. The demonstrators say that the suspension of Parliament is an undemocratic way to circumvent Parliament in order to ensure a no-deal Brexit. They were joined in London by Labour Party members of Parliament, including the Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell.
So the message is simple. Look, whatever side you're on in the debate around Brexit, the message is absolutely simple here. We're supposed to be a democracy. And that democracy is meant to be a parliamentary democracy. And where in a parliamentary democracy MPs are allowed to debate and, yes, disagree and eventually vote and take a decision. Now, we think that the decision that Boris Johnson was frightened of was Parliament itself taking control of the agenda next week and then allowing us democratically in debate with a vote to prevent a no deal. So therefore, the tactic he's used is to try effectively to close Parliament down, but in closing Parliament down, effectively it closes democracy down in this country.
Now, political turmoil in Europe isn't limited to Britain. In Italy, political representatives of several parties have continued to meet with President Sergio Mattarella in a bid to find solutions to the crisis in the country. The talks come amid an ongoing crisis which began on August 20th when Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte resigned. His resignation came after Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini withdrew his League party from the governing coalition and proposed a no-confidence vote against Conte. Meanwhile, the leader of Brothers of Italy, Giorgia Meloni, says her party insists on new elections and calls for protests if their demand is not met.
We continue to demand the one and only option: elections, liberty, sovereignty. We won't take any lessons either from that Democratic Party, which in the past 10 years had led the country for 6 years without ever winning the elections, nor from the members of the Five-Star Movement who ran in the elections stating that they would open the government like a can of tuna, and then they became the tuna trapped inside the can. We will continue to denounce the havoc that these parties are creating. It was not the topic of our conversation with President Mattarella, but I will use your attention to announce that we will be taking it to the streets.
The Zimbabwean government has urged the European Union to remove the illegal sanctions it imposed on Zimbabwe before speaking about human rights. Launching an anti-corruption campaign in Harare, the Zimbabwean Minister of Justice Ziyambi said it was unfair for EU to talk about human rights while it is violating ordinary people's rights by maintaining illegal sanctions on Zimbabwe. The United States and the EU are maintaining a decades-old economic blockade on Zimbabwe, despite calls by most African countries to have it lifted.
Cannot respect the rights of the citizens of Zimbabwe when sanctions are still there. So I want to call upon my brother as we launch the anti-corruption campaign to say that corruption and sanctions go hand in hand. When you have sanctions, you are bound to have shortages. And when you have shortages, those little corruption that my brother, Honorable PG, was talking about, they will start sprouting. So I urge him to reconsider the rights of the poor citizens of Zimbabwe and become an advocate of the anti-sanctions drive.
A Sudanese court has started the trial of security agents accused of causing the death of a teacher who died in custody earlier this year. 41 members of the National Intelligence and Security Services are suspected to have been involved in the death of Ahmed Al-Kir. He died in prison after being arrested for organizing protests against former President Omar al-Bashir. His death fueled the demonstrations against Bashir, who was toppled in April after months of mass rallies.
We are expecting that the trial will take a record amount of time. And what is helping is the accuracy of the judge and his good management of trial, as well as the seriousness of everyone to reach a resolution and to head towards a fair judgment, after condemning the convicts and acquitting the innocents, as the people are looking for the truth and justice.
We finish in the Caribbean, where Guyana's election commission, GCOM, says it will complete its house-to-house registration of voters this Saturday. GCOM is preparing for the country's regional and general elections as mandated by the Caribbean Court of Justice based in Trinidad and Tobago. The data gathered will be merged with the existing National Register of Registrants database. Newly appointed chairman, retired Justice Claudette Singh, said based on the High Court ruling on August 14th, the registration process was not unlawful or unconstitutional. And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesourenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Doris Polo. Thank you for watching.